They say respect is earned, not given. But what happens when arrogance blinds you to the person who already deserves it? That morning, outside Camp Pendleton's main gate, no one could have predicted that a single moment of disrespect would change everything. The new admiral had arrived, and nobody saw it coming. The California sun was barely up when Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped out of her civilian sedan, dressed in jeans and a plain Navy windbreaker. She'd driven through the night from Washington, exhausted but determined to arrive early, wanting to observe her new command before the formalities began. At 38, she was the youngest person to ever hold this position, and she knew the whispers would start the moment her rank was revealed. But Sarah had spent 20 years proving herself in a world that constantly underestimated her. One more day of anonymity felt like a gift. She grabbed her duffel bag from the trunk, took a deep breath of the crisp morning air, and headed toward the pedestrian entrance. What she didn't know was that 3 young Marines were jogging up behind her, laughing loudly, fresh off a night of celebrating their latest promotion. And they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. Corporal Jake Morrison was leading the pack, his buddies flanking him as they barreled through the narrow gate entrance at full speed. Sarah heard them at the last second, the pounding of boots on pavement, the cocky laughter. She tried to step aside, but there wasn't enough time. Jake's shoulder collided with hers, hard, sending her stumbling sideways. Her duffel bag flew from her hand, spilling its contents across the concrete. Personal items scattered everywhere, a framed photo, her uniform cap, a leather-bound notebook filled with years of handwritten thoughts. Sarah caught herself against the fence, her palms scraping against the chain link. For a moment, everything went silent except for the sound of her own breathing. Then Jake turned around, and instead of apology in his eyes, there was only irritation. "Watch where you're going, lady," he snapped, not even bothering to stop. His friends snickered, one of them muttering something about civilians not belonging on base. They kept walking, leaving her there on her knees, gathering her scattered belongings with trembling hands. And in that moment, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't reveal herself, not yet. She would let this play out exactly as it was meant to. She collected her things in silence, her jaw tight, her mind already calculating. A staff sergeant passing by helped her up, his eyes kind but questioning. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked. Sarah nodded, brushing dust from her jeans. "I'm fine, thank you." He lingered for a moment, as if sensing something significant about her, but she gave him a small smile and turned toward the administration building. Behind her, those 3 Marines had no idea they'd just knocked down the woman who would soon control every aspect of their military lives. How could they? In their minds, she was nobody, just another civilian who didn't belong in their world. But Sarah belonged here more than anyone. She'd earned every single star through blood, sweat, and sacrifices they couldn't begin to imagine. And today, they were about to learn that lesson the hardest way possible. 2 hours later, the entire base was assembled in the parade ground. Rows of Marines stood at attention under the climbing sun, dress uniforms crisp, faces forward. The change of command ceremony was about to begin. On the platform, the outgoing admiral stood beside the base commander, both scanning the crowd. Whispers rippled through the formation. Nobody had seen the new admiral yet. Rumors had been flying for weeks. Some said it was a decorated pilot from the East Coast. Others insisted it was a seasoned intelligence officer from overseas. But when the announcer's voice crackled through the speakers, introducing Rear Admiral Sarah Chen, every head turned toward the side entrance. And there she was, the same woman from that morning, walking across the parade ground in her pristine white uniform, rows of ribbons covering her chest, the 2 stars on her collar catching the sunlight like accusation itself. You could have heard a pin drop. The silence was deafening. Jake Morrison felt his stomach drop into his boots. Standing 3 rows back, he watched in horror as the woman he'd knocked down, the woman he'd dismissed as nobody, took her place on the platform. Beside him, his buddies had gone pale, their earlier bravado evaporating like steam. They'd messed up, They'd messed up catastrophically, and everyone was about to know. Sarah's eyes swept across the formation, calm and measured, until they landed exactly where she knew they would be. For just a fraction of a second, her gaze locked with Jake's. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked at him with an expression that said everything. "I see you. I remember. And you will learn." Then she turned to face the assembly, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the entire base with quiet, unshakable authority. "Good morning, Marines. Today begins a new chapter for all of us." The ceremony proceeded with military precision. Speeches given, flags exchanged, hands saluted. But Jake couldn't focus on any of it. His mind was replaying that morning over and over. The collision, his words, his arrogance. When the formation was finally dismissed, he knew what he had to do. He found her an hour later, standing alone near the administration building, reviewing paperwork. His approach was hesitant, his usual confidence completely gone. "Admiral Chen," he said, his voice barely steady. Sarah looked up, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing, just studied him. Then she spoke, her words measured and deliberate. "Corporal Morrison, I believe we've met before." Jake's throat was dry. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. This morning She raised a hand, stopping him. "You judged someone based on appearance. You showed disrespect to another human being because you assumed she didn't matter." Her words cut deeper than any reprimand. "That's not the Marine Corps, I know. That's not the leader you're supposed to be." Jake stood there, feeling smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. But then Sarah's expression softened, just slightly. "However," she continued, "I didn't reveal myself this morning because I wanted to see who you really are. And now I'm giving you a choice. You can let this moment define you, or you can learn from it and become the Marine you're capable of being." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Respect isn't about rank, Corporal. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person you encounter. Remember that woman you knocked down this morning. Remember how easily you dismissed her. And never let yourself do that again." Jake nodded, his eyes burning. "Yes, ma'am. I won't. I promise you." Sarah held his gaze for another moment, then extended her hand. "Then let's start again. Welcome to my command." He shook it, feeling the weight of second chances and hard lessons learned. As he walked away, he understood something profound. She could have destroyed his career with a single word. Instead, she'd given him something far more valuable. She'd given him wisdom he'd carry for the rest of his life. That evening, as the sun set over Camp Pendleton, Sarah stood on the bluffs overlooking the ocean. The same windbreaker from that morning pulled tight against the breeze. She thought about all the times she'd been underestimated, dismissed, knocked down in ways far worse than this morning's collision. And she thought about every person who'd given her a second chance when she needed it most. Leading wasn't about proving you were right. It was about making sure the people who follow you become better than they were yesterday. She'd learned that from the best commanders she'd ever served under. And now, it was her turn to pass it on. The waves crashed below, steady and eternal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight, new lessons to teach. But tonight, she allowed herself this quiet moment of victory. Not because she'd asserted her authority, but because she'd chosen something harder and far more meaningful. She'd chosen to lift someone up instead of tear them down. And that, she knew, was what real leadership looked like. That was what it meant to truly command respect. Not through fear or rank, but through the simple, powerful choice to see the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves.